And you're right. The men do need to hear it, right? And the reason is because we haven't been viewed in the world, as the people that can open up like that, and that can be honest. And I say honest. What I mean is even truthful, right? Is that so much we just kind of brush things aside, right? And we don't want to be viewed as weak. And the reality is nothing can be further from the truth. If you show vulnerability, I think it actually shows strength. Because listen, what we know, right, is that we will get better if we learn and we don't do those mistakes again. I don't care about being right or wrong at all. I mean, my wife would argue differently sometimes.
Let's ask her.
Because sometimes that's true. But the reality of it is, as soon as we can get away from that and just realize that this is a journey, and these are just steps in the journey, right? And there's just going to be things that are going to happen, and just acknowledge them and move on, right? I think, we as men, right, in particular, can benefit from that.
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place. All right, what up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Authentic Conversations. I am excited. As you know, we are full swing in a new season of the podcast. We've made some shifts, really exciting shifts, at least in my mind, because in all of the desire that I've had to speak on and dig into this idea of authenticity, now more than ever, I feel like I'm getting there. And I feel like I'm getting there because we're having these conversations with men that are talking about things that are really real and yet aren't often talked about. And so today I get the opportunity to do that with Tom Avery. Tom and I, as you hear so often, we're connected on LinkedIn through mutual friends. Tom works in the benefits world, which I'm sure we'll touch on at some point today. But when I went out into the LinkedIn world and said, hey, raise your hand if you'd love to come in and have a conversation on manhood, Tom was one of the first ones to do that. And so with that, Tom, welcome. I'm excited to have the conversation.
Same here. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. So before I get into my first actual question, I'll preface with, so why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, personally, professionally, kind of where you're at in the world right now?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to start with is that I married my best friend almost 30 years ago. So that's awesome and amazing, and she's put up with me for that long, and have two lovely women in my life. I don't say, they're now 19 and 24 years old, and very proud of them and their accomplishments and their journey in life, and still blessed to have both my parents alive, but they're struggling a little bit. So that's, it's great that I'm close to them still, meaning that they're 5 minutes away from my house, so I get to spend time with them. That's very important. And then in business, been 16 years running a benefits agency outside of Northern California, and then also started about 18 months ago a software company for specifically the insurance space. So running kind of two different entrepreneurial kind of adventures. So that's it in kind of a nutshell.
Now, it doesn't sound like you ever have too much extra time on your hands, even with just those responsibilities.
Well, I don't. You know what? I don't tend to overcomplicate my schedule, so I'll leave it at that. I always have prided myself in trying to not, make it too crazy.
No, it's good. That's good.
I always think if it's too crazy, I kind of question what am I doing to it? But that's for another subject, another time.
So I'm interested, before I get to now the question that I've replaced my first question with. What's fun like? I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
being married for almost 30 years, I'm sure you spend a lot of time with your wife and daughters and family and then business,
Yeah.
but what's hobby? What's entertainment outside of that for you?
First and foremost is spending time with my wife. And I know that sounds, a little, but she's my best friend. So, we spend a lot of time together, and that's really important to both of us. I love to cook. So I spend a lot of time cooking.
Is that why she loves you?
Well, she'll tell you that. She'll tell you that that's the reason why she married me. But I enjoy the social aspect of cooking. I enjoy kind of what comes with that, from start to finish and all those things in between. And then I just, enjoy exercise, whatever that is on the given day. So, and I say that, but, walking, golfing, that kind of thing. The only other thing that I said I'd like to get back into my life is that way back when I used to ride horses competitively. And so I'd like to bring that back at some point into my life as another hobby to get back and do some of those kind of things. We're, animal people through and through. And so, we'll see where that journey is. It's kind of one of those things that, it's not like getting a goldfish, getting a horse. So, and I'm not saying, I'm just saying, it's not just a simple thing, but that's some of the things.
Now I'm interested. So competitive and horses. So like you were a cowboy? Like what were you doing?
So 3-day eventing, it's actually an Olympic sport. And so it's kind of like a triathlon on horseback. So you could Google it and find out all kinds of stuff. But what I will say is I'm glad I did it as a young person because I felt invincible, because now I look at that and I just realize how stupid it is. I mean, in that that what I mean by that is like, it's just really dangerous. You got a horse that's running 20 miles per hour, that's 1,500 pounds, and you're jumping over fences that are 4 feet tall and don't move when you run into them. Okay. So, it's just amazing that, we're all, seasoned and professional with it, but still, it doesn't take much for something to happen that could be, quite traumatic. And you're the small part of that, that equation, meaning from the size perspective, right? So you gotta be very skilled and those kind of things. So, but watch the Olympics. It's been on the Olympics. It's been quite fun.
Now you just know what kind of man Tom is already. That's all we needed to hear. Okay, so you used a word in talking about your wife, and you said, my wife is my best friend. And I love that. I resonate with that so deeply. My wife and I were actually best friends before we even were attracted to each other romantically outside of that. So what is that? First of all, what does that mean to you? And how have you continued to develop that relationship over time? Actually, I have another question. I'll wait for that later. But so how have you worked that out over the years? Because it's a long time.
Yeah. So, it's always a challenge. And so, and I mean that, everybody faces the challenge. The thing I would say that's a little bit different is you just have to, at some point, go back and say, listen, we may have our differences, but we have so much that we have commonality with, and really what it comes down to is we're just very aligned, in lots of different ways. And I'll just classify it as ethically and morally, those we are very much in alignment. And because of that, it's very easy for us, even if we have our differences, to then go back to some kind of common core, right? So the thing is that, we, and I know it's a simple thing to say, but make sure that you find your spouse's love language and give them what they're looking for, right? And don't necessarily demand anything reciprocally, which is always difficult, right? But the reality of it is just give. Somebody a long time ago said to me, it says, as a man, we should be here to serve, right? Serve our family. And that resonated with me. And at the time, I would say I was being very selfish. I did not intentionally, but I was just not really focusing on that word or what it meant to my family or what have you. And it's changed things for me in a very positive way. And I think that, as a man, right, and in a relationship, and especially to your kids, especially when you have girls, I would say, okay, is that, being that father figure and giving to them the way that they want to be, the way they're receptive to it is really important, okay? Because I was raised not in a bad environment, and there's plenty of fatherhood examples out there where, the father is an authoritative figure and all those kind of things that go along with that. And I wasn't in that situation, okay? I was blessed that I wasn't. But the reality of it is like, today you can't, being firm with people, they don't necessarily, they want to be on equal playing ground. Now, as much as possible, right? But as a parent, you have to be the parent, right? All the time, right? So it's a fine line, but you don't have to be disrespectful. And I think that that's the thing is that, I'd say one of the things I've learned over the years is that there's a way to communicate and not be disrespectful and get your point across and not be authoritative and break down those barriers of, what a traditional father had been 100 years ago, right? And what they are now, because they are different.
Yeah. Well, and you touch on something that, immediately came to my mind when you talked about the fact that you have, two daughters, 24 and 19. I have two daughters that are 19 and 12. And so this has very much been on my mind for years. Wise people will tell us that, as we raise our daughters, we're modeling marriage to the best of our ability for those daughters that will one day get married. So just modeling the relationship. But then on top of that, we are trying to demonstrate to our daughters the type of man that they should desire to marry, right? That is
Correct.
Going to treat their spouse well, that's going to be respectful, that's going to be a firm hand to their children, but at the same time, that's going to be loving and gracious. And so how have you been able to do that having daughters is, it's been the greatest blessing in my life. I wouldn't change it for anything. And yet it is stinking difficult. And especially, the younger years are challenging just because they're little and they don't get it. Later on in life, though, a lot of times they really think they get it, even when they don't. Right. So there's a lot of challenge there. So how have you modeled that? And maybe even how have you learned to model that in such a way that you feel confident in where they're going in life?
Yeah, the way I've been introspective on this issue for a lot of years, and I always just kind of go back to one thing, and that's like, be a parent first. I think that's where we get off the rails, right? I'm not their friend. I am their parent, right? So the reality of it is that I think that's the key thing that I would like to share with people is just, be their parent. And that means having a tough conversation sometimes. That also means putting your arm around them and say that you love them and mean it, right? And then don't be the jerk or the whatever, when something goes awry. And I've learned that from my wife. My wife, she just, I'll just use a kind of a silly example, but I remember at one point my daughter, when she was first learning, my oldest daughter, when she was first learning to drive, like within the first few days, she backed the car into, something and, got a dent in the car. And I'm like, I'm doing the craziness, right? And by the way, they're called accidents, right? They're called accidents. So luckily, I say luckily, it was my wife and I that were together when we found out about the accident, right? And I'm like, I'm going off the rails. And she's like, it's an accident. And I'm like, yeah. And so then, she had to say that to me like 8 times because I'm a slow learner. But right. But the reality of it is that's like, it's like, come on, right? So listen, you can say like the good news in her case was kind of little before like phones and all the distraction that goes along with driving a car now. So it wasn't that she was being silly or foolish, right? Mm. But the reality of it is like she felt guilty. We didn't need to get on her on it, She didn't need to be punished for it. Now, if it happened again and again and again, that's a different story, right? But you got to give people grace. You got to give people grace, and not repeated, right? But because that turns into a problem. And I think that's where parenting comes in, right? Mm-hmm. The issue isn't that you were lax or hard on one issue; it's that you're not consistent.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm blessed. My kids have been awesome, and I always say, we screwed them up by the time they were 3 or 4 years old, and we didn't do anything than try to keep them on the rails for the rest of their, time with us, right? And the reality of it is that's kind of where I think our role is in some ways. It's just like we're like, we're like buffers on both sides to make sure that when something happens that we're out there going, whoa, come back, right? And that's really our role. It's education, it's, providing compassion and love and all those kind of things that go along with it, but keeping them on the rails as much as you can.
Yeah.
And so my kids have turned out great. And I just say in spite of myself or in spite of ourselves, because they
Yeah,
they deserve the credit. We don't.
I think that's so wise. And there was something in there that you said that just kind of reminded me of, when I served as a pastor for about 8.5 years. And so counseled a lot of young couples, especially challenged with their own children. And then even just, through friends. And, one of the things I've said to so many people is, we can be the greatest parents in the entire world and raise Hitler Jr., or we could be the worst parents in the entire world and raise an absolute angel. I said, so that's the grace given to us in parenting. And so then I believe because of that, then all we need to do is do everything we can to pour out every bit of our best into them, and just trusting that it's our best and we can't control the outcome. We don't, whether it's an accident because they made a dumb decision, or it was just an absolute accident, or they really make a truly horrible decision. If we've given them, to the best of our ability, every tool that's available, then we can't ask any more of ourselves. And I do feel like as parents, and I have seen this maybe more so in dads over the years, is as the dads get older, I think when they're younger, I see the mistake is a lot of times they kind of check out of the parenting responsibility. But I feel like as they get older, they start to bear a lot more of the guilt of the issues that children have along the way. And it's just so heartbreaking to me because both sides are in such great error, like you need to be involved all the time, which is, the early mistake. And then later on, like, yes, you made mistakes, but we all do. And you can't bear the weight of everything that your children do because that's just not the reality, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's really well said. I mean, when just like you're going to give your kids grace, give yourself grace. And so if you made an error, then acknowledge it and then give yourself a little bit of grace and then move on. And now listen, it's so much easier said than done. but the reality of it is like, listen, your kids and your wife and those around you that are relying on you, they really want you to give yourself grace. Remember, people do want right? You to move on. You're playing a critical role in their lives, right? And so, listen, you harping on what's happened before. If they've moved on, then why aren't you moving on? Yep. See that, and that's the thing, and you know, it's so hard to do. Okay, but what I would say is, listen, if it's a repeatable problem, then treat it as a repeatable problem. If it's a one-time thing or a two-time thing, then call it what it is, right? Mm-hmm. And just learn, move on, and enjoy, and then go back and try to enjoy and love people, right, to the best of your ability.
That's good.
Because it's, you know, we're only here for however many hours or days or weeks or months, right? Yeah. So let's appreciate what we can offer people.
Okay, so I'm interested in, you know, near 30 years of marriage, 24 plus years of parenting. You, I'm sure, have run into many of your own roadblocks along the way, whether that's in those roles or outside of that. And so what has your support structure looked like? What does community look like for you? Do you have other guys around you that support you in those things? Like where do you go for that?
So, you know, that's probably one thing that, you know, is a work in progress for me. And it's always been to a certain degree, but let me explain it a little bit. So, you know, one of the things that I think as parents, I mean, my wife and I, we were very internally focused with our family for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. And to the benefit of that, of our family, right? Meaning, you know, soccer games and, you know, all that stuff, right? And, you know, in sometimes we lost track of, you know, that external, I'll call it network that you might need to be able to continue to also, you know, feed, you know, your own, I would say, you know, improvement, maybe it's a good word. So, but one thing that I have had that's pretty consistent is, well, I was lucky enough when I was in college that I joined a fraternity, okay? And we have, I mean, an amazing group of men that are still together. There's usually, we get together multiple times over the years. I see them regularly, and we do annual kind of things that are focused around some of the beliefs of the fraternity, which are very consistent with what you might, you know, expect. And I've been able to really rely on those relationships, and, you know, that's been very, very, very important. So, and I would say it's unique. Literally about 60 of us that are still incredibly close. Like, you know, we see each other, like, I see at least one of my brothers from the fraternity at least once a week for various reasons, you know, social, doing charity, doing whatever that is, right? I'm just, you know, and it's, you know, it's awesome. And I just happen to be, I still live close to the town where I graduated from college. And the irony of it is, and not everybody's in this situation, that 60% of all graduates from my university still reside basically in the same area. Okay. Wow. So there's a lot of us that are still just here local. And that's just a dynamic that's happened related to my university. But, you know, so that kind of plays into it some.
And are you the type of person that is comfortable, you know, picking up the phone and, you know, and calling one of those guys and saying, hey, I just had a meltdown. Hey, I just did this, and this, and I'm really struggling and I need your input? Or is it more of you're hanging out with these guys and maybe things come up?
Yeah, more of the latter. In, you know, I would say that part of the reason is for that, at least for me, is that, remember, I would say, I hope I'm not unique in this regard, okay? But, you know, I married my best friend. So, I go there first, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing that's maybe a little unique for me, right? But I do think it's something, I need to expand maybe some of my male relationships also to include some other people too. And I think that, I recognize that now as I'm getting, I'm 55 years old, and I realize that I probably do need to spend a little bit more time there. But let me also say the other thing is I'm blessed. I've got, like, what I didn't mention is I've got 4 really, really good guy friends from high school that we still spend a ton of time together with. And they are probably even my closer friends, right? And I do a little bit more of that with them than maybe the rest. But the other side of it is I've been blessed that I haven't really gone into a lot of areas where I've necessarily needed a lot of that in my life, and for various reasons, but we struggle, we all struggle, right? And in the past, I'd kind of keep it probably a little too close to my vest, and I need to open up more. There's no question, and that's definitely an area of focus to move forward in this journey of life, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and I think while your relationship with your wife is very out of the norm. Many people may say that they have a similar one, but most don't. Right. I would also say that having sustained relationships that have been, as close as they are, is somewhat out of the norm, especially I think for guys, more so. Yeah. But I think what's typical and something that you bring up, so for me, there's a small group of guys, 2 of which I've been friends with since we were 3. One was 3 years old, and I'm 43 now. And the other one, we became friends when I was about 7. And those are the 2 longest ones. And what was interesting was, so I went through a period of life where my wife and I were nearing divorce, and they were there. And this is not a fault of theirs at all, but they were more observant in a lot of it, and me to them. They were throwing pieces of their life away, and and making big mistakes, and all through the years that's kind of continued. Like we're extremely tight. Like literally would die for each other, no question about it. And there's been a couple of other guys that have come along like that, but it wasn't until the last couple of years, and actually for us, the tightest group of us, we all experienced a really significant tragedy together. And it was after that, like when we were all brokenhearted together, was when we finally started to open up. And so for the last 4 years now, we're actually intentionally, hey, let's go grab dinner. And when we sit down at dinner, it's what's really going on? How is this area? How's the relationship? How's your marriage? How is, what are you struggling with? Like, how's your health? And it's kind of weird because it feels foreign, and which is so ironic considering the fact that, I've known them for so long. But I think when you get into those rhythms of comfort, and not even bad, but just rhythms of comfort, it prevents those deeper conversations at times. And so here we are with all of these really close relationships that we're not utilizing to be the best that we can be. And we end up in some ways really lonely when it comes to the darkest moments of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, and that's for sure, right? And in fact, it's worse than that, I would say, even because then when it's the darkest point of your lives, then there comes the whole embarrassment when it comes out, and then then people get shunned, or they feel like they're shunned, and it may not be really that. It's just like the recipient. Let's just say it's one of your best friends, the guy that you've been around for since 3 years old, right? I mean, they just don't know what to say. They don't know how to act. They don't know what their role is, right? They don't know what you want, and they also don't know how to start the conversation, right? They don't go and say, "Hey, listen, I don't know. Given the events of the other day, I don't know if you want to talk about it. I don't know if if you need my support. I don't know what it is. But I want to let you know that I feel like it's awkward, right? And I don't want it to be awkward. but I also don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So let's, if you want to talk about that, let's talk about that. Right.
Yeah.
And remember, you don't have to necessarily be vulnerable to have that conversation. You just have to be honest. And listen, I think most people want to be honest. They just don't know how to communicate it in such a way that doesn't open them up in some kind of weird way, right? But if you have that conversation, it's like, listen, I just don't know what to do, right? No harm in it. They could say, well, listen, you're fine. Don't worry about it. And they don't want you in, right? Okay, that's fine. But conversely, maybe they do want you in, and it was odd for them too, and they're glad that you said something, right?
I mean, that is what you just said there is so wise, and something that so many people, but especially again, because, this is what I'm really trying to focus on, like the men listening need to hear is,
for sure.
Like that's so powerful, so powerful.
Yeah, and you're right. The men do need to hear it, right? And the reason is because we haven't been viewed in the world, as the people that can open up like that, and that can be honest. And I say honest, what I mean is even truthful, right? Is that so much we just kind of tend to brush things aside, right? And we don't want to be viewed as weak. And the reality of it is nothing can be further from the truth. If you show vulnerability, I think it actually shows strength, because listen, what we know, right, is that we will get better if we learn and we don't do those mistakes again. I don't care about being right or wrong at all. I mean, my wife would argue differently sometimes.
Let's ask her.
Because I, sometimes that's true. But the reality of it is, as soon as we can get away from that and just realize that this is a journey, and these are just steps in the journey, right? And that there's just things that are going to happen, and just acknowledge them and move on, right? I think, we as men, right, in particular, can benefit from that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And remember, let me mention the other thing is like, listen, remember, you have to listen. You have to listen more than you have to talk. And so listen, if you're having friction with a loved one, whether or not it's your spouse, significant other, kids, or whatever, listen. Listen. I'm saying that partly so that I actually will listen to myself. Okay, I'm actually speaking to myself in some ways, right? Okay, but that's the truth, right? Remember, friction or frustration or whatever comes from, right, some form of miscommunication, typically, right? So listen and find out what the hell's really going on, and then remember, don't die on the damn hill unless you want to die on the damn hill. Time, it's all about compromise. And listen, you don't have to give in. You don't have to be like, I'm not suggesting you just roll over, right? But have good relationships if you want good relationships. Have them.
That's so good.
It requires communication.
That's so good.
Right?
That was like that last couple of minutes. People just need to keep rewinding that and listening to what you said over and over again. They need to listen, right? Listen.
Just listen. No, and I mean, look, it's easier said than done. Okay, and I've done. Part of the reason why I say this is because in the last few years, let me go back to go forward. If my wife's biggest frustration about some of our relationships has been that I've always been quick to show my frustration. Okay. And, the reality of it is that where do we show our frustration the most is the ones we love the most. Right. So, and now I recognize it, right? 27 years. Now listen, I mean, I knew it was happening, but I finally decided, that it wasn't just gonna, it just had to stop, right? Period. And it's so much, it's so much better than what it was, right?
Yep.
We just have to acknowledge our faults and move on and try not to repeat them.
So good. Okay, well, my first question was the question that was going to be first is now going to be last, because I feel like, you painted a really good picture for how you have fulfilled the roles of husband, of father, which I believe are the two most important roles any man will play in life, if they're given the ability to live in those roles. I'm not saying those are ultimate roles, but if you're given
right.
the opportunity, those are priorities before everything else.
Sure.
So my first question, now to be my last question for you, and this is how we're going to land the plane. So then how would you, in all the ways that you've lived your life for the 50 some odd years you've been around, all the years of marriage, fatherhood, so how would you then define what it means to be a man today?
Ooh. So you're asking me to land the plane without you didn't give me any or anything.
You can crash it if you want. I mean, just this is it. You're going out with a bang right here.
I think it's really, it's very unique, and I'm going to say something that's going to be, we never had a playbook of how to be a father or a husband or any of that kind of stuff, or a parent. Okay. And I believe that. What we do though have is we do have our ethics and our morals. And so I think that that's been lost in a lot of ways in the last cycle, right? And I say cycle 5-10 years. I just think that we're seeing an eroding of our ethics and morals and how we react to things. And that's probably the biggest challenge that I think we as men have to kind of embrace and change, which is like, listen, it's not okay to commit adultery. It's not. And listen, I get why people do it and I understand it, but be respectful, right? Be respectful of the relationship. I'm using that as an analogy, maybe because it's a little bit of a lightning rod and not everybody will agree with me, and 50% of all people get divorced, right? And all those kind of things. But listen, get divorced first, okay? Get divorced first. If it's not working, it's not working, right? But listen, you have to be a role model to your kids, especially. And you've got to do that through your ethics and morals, right? And it's okay. Listen, it's okay. I think it's okay if you decide that it's just not right and you want to move on. Fine. But do it the right way, because our kids are relying on you. Everyone around you is relying on you to provide leadership in the way it's supposed to be, not necessarily the way, some people believe it to be. And so I think that that's probably the hardest thing today, is to be able to go out and just say, listen, I have ethic and moral conviction. These are the kind of things that they are, and stick to them, right? And I'll say it. I mean, in our leadership, right, out there in our political environment and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I look at that and it seems like it's an abyss that we really, I don't know. I'm so disappointed in some of our men today, because we're not providing, any real guidance to our children and to our spouses and to our parents and all that kind of stuff. I just, and it's disgusting to me, honestly. But I also have a lot of hope, and I have a lot of hope because, conversations like this are starting to happen more often. That we can become more vulnerable, and we don't have to be viewed as weak. In fact, we think it's strength. It can be strength. And we can do that through our convictions. So the last thing I'll say, though, is just don't misrepresent or misunderstand what I'm saying about ethics and morals. Do not impose your own ethics and morals on someone else. Just provide guidance or leadership or fatherhood or whatever it is to the people around you, and they'll join you, right? But don't impose yours on someone else, which is very difficult to do, especially if you have conviction. But that's also what's happening today, is everybody's trying to impose their own will on someone else, and it just doesn't work, right? So
that's good. And I mean, I think it goes back to even when you were talking about arguments earlier, you know, there are certain things that we should choose to die on a hill for. I do believe that with all my heart, but you better be very, very particular about what those are. You better be very convicted in what those are. And outside of that, you're right. I mean, we model the right behavior, the right leadership, the right moral, the right ethic, and people will follow when they see that we're doing it for the right reasons. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And yours was a small lightning strike. I could have blown it all up, but I don't want to absolutely ruin people's heart at this point. I'll save that for another day. So with that, I mean, Tom, I appreciate it. You know, again, you know, we're not trying to necessarily solve the world's problems in one conversation. And throughout this season of talking to different men, you know, everybody's in a slightly different context. You know, there's going to be a husband and father that has a very different experience than you do. And obviously this plays into the business world that you lead and live in. And we didn't talk about that, and that's important. But what I love here is there was this common thread. And I believe that it started with where we started right away was you talking about your relationship with your wife. And I feel like when you have the respect that you do for your wife, again, it doesn't always look perfect, but when you have the respect that you do, when you see her the way you do, that resonates, not just with your children, though that is so important, but to everything and everybody else. And so I have a lot of respect for that. I appreciate the fact that, I mean, this is the first time that you and I have had a conversation longer than 5 minutes. And I have a lot of respect for you and appreciate what you have, you know, accomplished to this point. And then the fact too, that you said that you're striving for so much more. So thanks for sharing today. Just so appreciate the time and your commitment to doing what you can to model what it means to be a man. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate the time too. And it was fun. Happy to do it anytime.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that wraps up another episode of Authentic Conversations. As always, I'll make sure to put some contact information to Tom in the show notes. If you want to reach out to him, you got a question, thought, concern, whether it's on how to be a man, husband, a father, maybe you want to do business with him, go ahead, reach out to him. I'm sure he'll be welcoming to your outreach. You know where to find me. And as always, I want to remind you to be you, be happy, be authentic. Take care, guys. Talk to you soon. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.